Ghost Story is a supernatural thriller released in 1981 and directed by John Irvine.
Yes, as you can probably tell from the title, it's about a ghost.
It is.
And stories.
Yes.
So it centres around 4 sort of elderly gents who are friends, belong to what they call the Chowder Society. They tell each other ghost stories. As we meet them, they're in the middle of a story, and then they go their separate ways. We learn a little bit about them. One of them's a doctor, one of them's the mayor, one of them's a lawyer, and the other one I think is just a businessman. So, and they're played, by some legendary actors. You've got Fred Astaire, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., John Houseman, and
Mervyn Douglas.
That's the one. So and then we see them suffering from nightmares, like in a cold sweat, and they're tossing and turning and sort of calling out in the night. They are sort of haunted by something that happened in their past. It kind of shifts backwards and forwards. We then cut to the son of one of these guys. There's a naked woman in his bed. And he's saying, "Oh, who are you? Who are you?" Which is all a bit strange. And then he turns her over and she's got like a skeletal face, and it shocks him so much that he falls backwards out of this window of this high-rise building and falls to the ground dead.
Falls into another window lands next to a swimming pool.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Next to the swimming pool, not in the swimming pool.
No. So and then it happens, this guy's a twin. The twin travels back to this New England town where these 4 guys reside, because one of these guys is the father of these twins. He then starts to experience strange goings on, and then, not only are these guys having nightmares, but then they start to see things when they're awake as well. Bad things start to happen to them, shall we say. It's difficult to sort of go without sort of spoiling it, but stuff happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it's kind of, we'll try very hardest not to give spoilers. Obviously, it's a very old film now.
Yeah, it's based on a book by Peter Straub, so if you've already read the book, obviously you'll know where it's going.
Yeah, this plot line comes up in other horror films, but the film treats it like this big
mystery.
Secret. You kind of see it coming.
Yeah, it's not really a surprise, is it? It's like...
No, I have to say, I found the film, so I enjoyed it. I found it very slow. It's a lot of these early, so we covered A Changeling, which we did, which was also early 80s. And I think in a lot of these films, not just horror films, a lot of films, I think, from that kind of period, 1980 to about 83, films feel very old now. And I don't know if it's just that time period, that small pocket of like between 1980 and 1983, before you started to get bigger the Back to the Futures and all those films. That period, and maybe it's like a decade thing as you come into a new decade. Then the first few years, things are changing. Anyway, I've always found films around that period to be quite slow at times and a bit whimsical, certainly in this story.
It takes its time. It takes its time. Surely,
yeah. What it's got going for it, it is really quite creepy at times, and as a supernatural film, it works, and it's quite surreal. I do like the fact that these older films, you watch a lot of supernatural films nowadays. I can't really talk too much about them because I don't watch a lot of them, but obviously your famous ones are your Paranormal Activities, and then all the Annabelle and all these
Conjuring
and all that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure a lot of them run the same format. They have the same types of jump scares and things like that. You go back, 20, 30, 40 years, you start getting into maybe slightly more surreal territory. They play with the imagery a bit, and there's some quite strange things in here.
There's some good special effects and some good makeup effects and things like that. But look, unsettling.
Yeah, that's probably...
But I get, again, we said this every time we cover a horror film, that when you've seen enough of these films, even if there aren't like musical cues to tell you, which again, in a lot of horror films these days, there are, your brain kind of gets trained to know when these things are coming. And I don't think there was any music at this point, but it's a guy on his own in a creepy house. You know that something's going to happen.
And then it's the same with, you put like you said, you spoke about this scene in Woman in the Bed, and the whole thing is quite dreamlike anyway. You're not quite sure if it's real or not.
You're already sort of trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And then...
but then of course he looks, he tries to get a turn, and the hand's going to her, and she looks odd because she almost looks like she's dead on the bed herself. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, well, she's going to turn around and it's going to be a weird face or something. We've seen The Shining, we've seen, all the other films where that happens.
It wasn't a surprise at all.
It wasn't a surprise. The effect was quite weird, and it was maybe startled a bit. That scene was very weird. And then he falls out the window and you see his
You see his private parts.
See his bits flapping around in the wind.
I don't know if he just got out the bath or he was about to get in the bath, but the bath was running and was overflowing.
It was overflowing as well.
And again, that was weird.
I mean, what I found odd about, because to me that whole scene felt like a dream, but then it turns out it's real.
I mean, obviously later on in the film it makes sense.
Well, it does, kind of.
Well, I would say it's not your traditional ghost film where you just got a creepy figure, scaring people and things like that. There's other elements to it where you're not really sure if some sort of entity or or whether it's a real person or what the hell's going on. So if you watch it thinking you're just watching a sort of traditional ghost film where there's going to be a spectral presence and things moving on their own and shadows and things like that and people terrified of things, there's that stuff in there, but it also has quite a large section where something's not quite right, but you're not quite sure how it fits with the rest of the film. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, I can't really say more without sort of spoiling stuff.
I think possibly, and it's if you go back, obviously nowadays we live in an age where there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of supernatural horror films and ghost films that come out literally one after the other. Once you get a film that's successful, they're going to release loads of like so Paranormal Activity comes out, hugely successful, and you've got loads of other kind of copycats that come along, and then you get all the sequels as well. So we are in a world now where we get churned out, they churn out this stuff all the time. When this came out, yes, there were other films about ghosts and supernatural occurrences, but they weren't, as far as I know, I mean, they may be, and I wasn't aware of it because I was much younger, but they don't seem to be churned out all the time. No. So I think there was more room for experimentation with these films. Yeah. And so you got quite, some of them were just plain like ghost films, but then the films themselves were quite, they played around with different ideas, and so you got things like The Changeling. I mean, The Changeling, this one, Entity, Poltergeist, there's 4 films about ghosts, but they're all very different films. They're not copying. None of them are copying the other. They've all got their own distinct personality, I think, which you maybe don't get so much of now. So I think a lot of the time these films, they might not be great, but they have some really interesting ideas.
Yeah,
in
definitely.
them, which I find you get more in those days than perhaps you do nowadays, because nowadays obviously it's more about the ka-ching and bums on seats.
I mean, obviously, horror films traditionally are quite cheap to make and will obviously make lots of money if they're popular. So of course, the cheaper it is to make, the more money you're going to make back. So that's why you do get endless sequels to popular horror films, because it's all about the cash. Fair enough, it is a business at the end of the day. So
it is.
So why not?
That's true.
But I think, again, that's why maybe these days don't take as many risks with horror films. They find something like Paranormal Activity, which is a small, cheap independent film, suddenly captures the imagination of the audience and becomes huge, and then they'll try and capitalise that for as long as possible to keep people coming back for more. But it does just end up being more of the same ultimately. And obviously the cast, make it, you don't, these days you wouldn't get 4 sort of gents in their 70s and 80s at the forefront of the movie.
That's something else that I pick up in other films around this time. The Changeling had George C. Scott. Nowadays, for the much of the time nowadays, horror films are just about young people. Yeah. Maybe 30-something or teenagers. You go back to the 60s, 70s, 80s. A lot of these films featured older people in, which I just always found. It's different, you get a bit bored of youngsters in your films all the time. Sometimes you want some of the older people. Obviously, with older people, you get actors that have been around for longer and maybe act in different ways.
I think I read, or it was on the extras, that it was the last film for all 4 of them. I think.
Yeah, I think it's the last film for 3 of them.
Right.
Well, it may have been 4 of them. Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah.
It was. Yeah. Yes, because of course they'd all been doing films. I mean, Fred Astaire obviously was mostly famous for dancing. In fact, there's a scene in there, so obviously we do get flashbacks when we get these old men as their younger selves. And the guy playing Fred Astaire when he's on screen, there's a scene where they have to dance, and he says, "I can't dance." And obviously he was playing the younger version of Fred Astaire. Bit of a nod there to Fred Astaire's life.
Staying with the cast, obviously the young woman, the ghost, the whatever, is played by Alice Krige.
Yeah.
Who at the time, was quite she wasn't just starting, well, she was kind of just starting out her acting career. She'd been in Chariots of Fire. But yeah, she was quite early on in her career, and I think her performance in it is great. She's
standout in it.
She's
good.
Creepy, but also alluring at the same time. And some scenes, her facial expressions, a mood will change, in a split second, and it kind of, her performance keeps you on your toes.
Her performance creeped me out.
Yeah,
I was on every time she was on screen, I was like, because I found her very unsettling. Really good. I mean, her performance was really good. It's almost worth seeing it for her performance.
Yeah.
But she's done some Star Trek stuff, hasn't she?
She was the Borg Queen in First Contact.
I mean, there's nothing for me, but yeah. And there's also Patricia Neal. I think she plays. I think she's Fred Astaire's wife. But she was Roald Dahl's wife in real life. She was in HUD with Paul Newman and many other films in kind of 60s, 70s, that period. And then, of course, you got the main characters, Craig Wasson, who plays the two brothers.
Yeah.
Recognisable face.
Yep. If you say so.
Did you think so?
Not really.
I know him from one other film, The Boys in Company C.
Right.
Which is, have you seen that?
No. Rings a bell, yeah.
So that's literally Full Metal Jacket without Kubrick on board. He's done other films as well. He's kind of, to me, he's quite a recognisable face. He's good in the film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's playing two roles.
He reminded me a little bit of, we obviously spoke about The Dark Half recently.
Yeah.
A little bit like Timothy Hutton in that. He's got that, I mean, obviously it's a supernatural film, as is that.
One of the brothers is a bit slicker and yeah. I mean, we don't spend a lot of time with that. This is the brother that obviously falls out the window at the start, and we do have a couple of scenes with him later on, but he's not playing that part very much.
No.
Mainly with the other one. Like we said, it sets it up like it's some amazing mystery, but it's not really. It's pretty obvious where it's heading.
Once you get there, and you're like, okay, it is that story.
Yeah.
It then just kind of puts back, slots back in all the pieces that you need to know, or doesn't, because it doesn't kind of infill everything.
What I was going to say was basically, I think the cast, makes it.
Sell it.
Yeah. It makes it, enjoyable to watch. It's also kind of weird sort of it's not a subplot, but it's like he's homeless. I don't know if he's homeless or...
Yeah, that is weird, because that doesn't really...
It kind of, they kind of disappear, don't they?
Yeah.
Anyway, again, it's difficult to talk about it without spoiling it, but there's sort of... It's like an abandoned house, and this guy is like squatting there, but he seems to know...
The child.
Yeah, with a child. I think did he say it was his brother? And he sort of threatens these old guys, and he seems to know about this ghost and who it is and things like that. But it's never really explained
because you get the. I mean, he turns up in one scene which is quite creepy. And I quite like that scene. He comes down in a lift. Where, a lot of old
you think that's a ghost or something.
Yeah, but in a lot of these old houses had the old, what are they called? The old dumb waiter.
Yeah.
I don't think it is one of them actually. That's
it's
smaller.
Just a lift.
But it's just a lift in an old house.
Yeah.
Because old people like to have lifts in old houses. And he comes down on the lift, and he's kind of like, he comes down, he's all like this, a bit like Dracula, like Christopher Lee and Dracula or something. And it's quite creepy, and that's a good scene. So he's in that. And then you get this idea that maybe he's like in cahoots with the ghost, but you never actually see them together.
No.
What?
It's not quite... I mean, I think you sort of hear half a conversation off screen.
Yeah, but it's quite an odd thing.
Yeah, it's a bit strange. I mean, again, like I said, obviously it's based on a novel. A lot of the stuff from the novel, was cut out. So whether there's a lot more of that, I can only assume that that's the case. His character is has a bigger part in the novel. I don't know.
Maybe it would be worth going back to the novel and someone, putting a fresh spin on it or something.
Well, I think it's the sort of film where if they remade it, they'd just chuck a load of CGI in it and it would just be rubbish. So.
That's true.
So just leave it alone.
Yeah, forget that idea.
And they'd replace all the old guys with...
young people.
Yeah. Even though it wouldn't make any sense.
No. You have it.
Yep.
Oh, you bought it recently, didn't you?
I picked up the Blu-ray, released by Second Sight in the UK. That's quite a nice disc. It's got lots of features on it. It's got a commentary with John Irvine. We haven't really talked about much, have we?
No, because we had a quick look before we started recording, and of course he made a Raw Deal with Schwarzenegger, the British director. Did lots of stuff in the 60s, 70s over here on TV and whatnot, and then he did Raw Deal, and what else did he do?
He did the TV version of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
He did that, and Next of Kin with Patrick Swayze. He did that too.
So quite an eclectic mix of
quite
movies,
a few, a few different stuff. He's still making films, but he hasn't done anything of note.
No.
I think for the last 20 years or so. But he's still out there making films. So an interesting fellow.
Yeah, so it's got a commentary with him, and it's got various interviews. It's got an interview with Peter Straub about the book, and sort of the genesis of it, and quite an interesting interview with Alice Krige as well. She, quite in depth, talking about how she was cast, and she genuinely seemed to really enjoy making it. Yeah, and it's got interviews with the screenwriter and producers and visual effects artists. So loads of interesting stuff on there. This it was also released in the States by Screen Factory. I think it's basically the same disc, all the same features.
Okay.
So get it on both sides of the pond.
I don't know why. I like the cover. It's a typical. I mean, it looks like a spooky film with the haunted house on there and the moon. The time has come to tell the tale.
Indeed.
So
they take their time to tell the tale.
They do take their time to tell the tale.
Like, just tell the tale already.
So that was Ghost Story, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Yep, hit the subscribe button up there, and don't forget to hit the bell for notifications. There's some other videos to check out over there. Come and find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and come back next week for another video.